The world of finance is a complex game played on a global stage. Every country is a player wielding their currency like a chip, hoping to secure a stable future. But who keeps the game fair? International Monetary Fund, the self-proclaimed guardian of the global purse. A force for good in turbulent world, or puppet master controlling the strings. For the story of IMF is not about numbers and graph. It's about the life of billions, the faith of nations, and the future of our interconnected world. In the aftermath of World War II, the world was in ruins, economies were devastated, and international trade was at a standstill. Something had to be done to prevent a repeat of Great Depression. So in 1944, representatives from 44 countries gathered at Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire, USA. Their goal was to create a new international monetary system that would promote stability and growth. The result was the Bretton Woods system, which established two key institutions: the World Bank to finance reconstruction and the IMF to oversee the international monetary system. The IMF initial mission was to stabilize exchange rates and prevent competitive devaluations. It did this by creating a system of fixed exchange rate where countries pegged their currency to gold or the US dollar. This system ushered in a period of relative stability and economic growth. In 1971, the Bretton Woods system collapsed.
I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. We will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system.
This event ushered in a new era of floating exchange rates, where currencies are determined by supply and demand in the market. The IMF had to adapt its role in this new environment. When a country stumbles, the IMF is often the first responder. Financial crises, natural disaster, even pandemics. The fund throws its lifeline, offering billions to prop up currencies, rebuild economies, and keep the global engine humming. In 1994, Rwanda faced an unimaginable tragedy. The 100-day genocide tore apart the nation, leaving over 80 lakh dead and millions displaced. Infrastructure was destroyed, basic services were disrupted, and the economy was in shambles. The IMF recognized the urgency of the situation and acted swiftly. They provided Rwanda with $32 million in emergency funding. But the burden of Rwanda debt added another layer of complexity. The IMF stepped in again, advocating for Rwanda inclusion in the Enhanced Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. This initiative provided significant debt relief, reducing Rwanda external debt by over $810 million. Beyond immediate relief and debt relief, policy advice and technical assistance were provided to lay down reforms. The IMF collaborated with government to develop a long-term poverty reduction strategy paper. This roadmap outlined a comprehensive strategy for poverty reduction, economic growth, and human development. Today, Rwanda's story is one of the most remarkable recovery. The country has achieved impressive economic growth, reducing poverty by over 50% since the genocide. Overall, Rwanda presents a story of resilience, remarkable progress against all the odds. Today, South Korea is a global powerhouse, a tech giant, an economic miracle. But rewind just a few decades and the picture is dramatically different. Ravaged by war, poverty, and crippling debt, South Korea's future seemed bleak. In the late 1990s, South Korea, like many Asian countries, faced a devastating financial crisis. The Asian tiger was on the brink of collapse.
In 1997, the crisis erupted with a string of historic bankruptcies. January, Hanbo Steel, the nation's 14th largest company. March, Sammy Steel. April, the Genro Group defaulted on a major loan. July, Kia, the 8th largest chaebol, defaulted. In a domino effect, the merchant banks which had loaned to the chaebols were buried under mountains of bad debts.
International Monetary Fund stepped in with a massive $58 billion bailout package. This emergency cash injection was a lifeline, preventing economic meltdown and stabilizing Korea. The IMF is known for its tough love approach, prescribing a better pill, structural reforms. South Korea, under the IMF guidance, implemented reforms with a remarkable speed and discipline. They partnered with South Korea to develop a long-term vision for growth and prosperity. South Korea's economic soared, fueled by export, innovations, and highly skilled workforce. The country became a leader in semiconductor, shipbuilding, and consumer electronics. But it is important to remember that South Korea's success was not solely due to IMF. The Korean people's hard work, resilience, and commitment to reform played a critical role.
For those who lived it, this was an unforgettable display of sacrifice and patriotism. Hit hard by the Asian financial crisis, South Korea's government asked the IMF for a $58 billion bailout, and the country wasted no time getting to work on paying it back. Millions donated precious family heirlooms to be melted into gold bars. The gold went some way to helping, even if largely psychologically, and thanks to economic restructuring and currency movements, South Korea bounced back, repaying its debt to the IMF in about 3 years.
From South Korea's remarkable comeback to Rwanda post-genocide revival, the IMF has helped nations rise from ashes. But the IMF prescription does not suit everyone. Argentina's history with the IMF is a cautionary tale.
Argentina went back to the IMF doctor, who upped the austerity dose. It slashed public spending, it raised taxes and interest rates, and of course took plenty of IMF loans.
Repeated bailouts, accompanied by demanding conditions, are blamed for fueling Argentina's boom and dust cycle and exacerbating its debt burden.
The cure ended up being worse than the disease. And the combination of cuts and taxes almost killed the patient.
Argentina's frequent economic crisis fueled criticism of the IMF one-size-fits-all approach. One of the IMF's most controversial tools is structural adjustment programs, or SAPs. SAPs were born in 1980s to help developing countries over stagnation and boost economic growth. The recipe: liberalization, tearing down trade barriers, privating industries, and attracting foreign investments. Alongside came austerity, cutting government spendings, balancing budgets, and controlling inflation. Austerity measures can mean slashing critical social programs like education and healthcare, leaving the most vulnerable behind. Take Zambia in 1980s. Austerity cuts crippled healthcare, leading to the outbreak of preventable disease. In Bolivia, cheap imports flooded the market, destroying local industries and causing widespread unemployment. These programs prioritize debt repayment over local development needs. Another example is Greece crisis. In 2010, Greece teetered on the brink of financial collapse.
Public debt has skyrocketed to around 300 billion euros, and the country's budget deficit is at 13%.
The €240 billion rescue package for Greece was provided with a bitter pill: austerity measures. Public spending slashed, wage cut, tax hike, a painful medicine meant to cure Greece's economic ills. But it turned into poison. Austerity chokehold Greece into deep recession, unemployment soared, and social unrest boiled over.
Thousands gathered outside the parliament in Athens, determined to halt MPs debating tough new cuts, higher taxes, as a way out of Greece's financial crisis.
The IMF initially registered calls for significant debt restructuring, advocating full repayment, despite its unsustainability for Greece. This created further pressure on the economy and prolonged the crisis. While the IMF eventually conceded to some debt restructuring, well, it was not enough and came too late to prevent significant damage. The power dynamics within the Troika and the Greece limited say in policy decision fueled resentments and criticism.
The International Monetary Fund is expected to admit mistakes over its handling of the Greek bailout. The Wall Street Journal managed to get hold of internal papers which suggested the organisation underestimated the impact of austerity measures on the Eurozone country, which is in the midst of a 6-year recession. It goes on to admit that they bent their own rules to make Greek debt appear sustainable.
Despite this, the International Monetary Fund sits at the heart of global financial governance, wielding immense influence over economic policies and bailout packages in struggling countries. But beneath its banner of stability lies a contentious issue: the undemocratic voting power structure. Who holds the reins? The IMF decision-making is based on quotas, essentially financial contribution from member countries. The bigger the contribution, the bigger the say. This means developed nations like US, Japan and European giants holds a disproportionate sway, while developing countries, often facing greater economic struggles, have a quieter voice. One vote for every $1 billion translates to richer nations having undue control over policies that impact poorer countries. The IMF acknowledged the concerns surrounding its voting structure. Reforms have been initiated to give developing countries a slightly larger say, but the gap remains significant. The question remains same: how do we ensure that the IMF policies reflect the needs and aspirations of all member countries, not just the wealthiest one? Can we find a balance between economic stability and democratic representation? There are no easy answers. Another point of contention is the IMF use of conditionalities. attaching policy reforms to its financial assistance. While aimed at promoting economic stability, IMF condition can infringe on a country's sovereignty and limits its ability to pursue independent development policies.
Critics say conditions attached to IMF loans often hurt developing countries and favor richer members.
Well, you just need to look at the result. The result has been that developing countries have consistently been suppressed in their economic development, and their resources have been extracted very efficiently and very cheaply for the benefit of the industrialized countries.
The IMF argue its conditions are necessary to attract investors and rebuild confidence. It pushes for policy reforms, all to make the economic business friendly. But whose business are they really in? That is the crux of the debate. Does the IMF empower economies or undermine sovereignty? Are its conditions truly aimed at long-term development? Or do they prioritize short-term financial stability at the cost of social well-being? The 21st century presents new challenges: climate change, inequality, and the rise of digital currencies. The IMF is evolving, embracing green finances, advocating for debt relief, and even exploring the implication of cryptocurrencies. The future of IMF is uncertain. Can it navigate the complex labyrinth of global finance in a rapidly changing world? Will it find the right balance between stability and progress, between helping nations and respecting their sovereignty?